you a brief background. I started a business, and I was in the wristwatch business, distribution and manufacturing of wristwatches for about 17 years. And I sold my watches throughout the United States, the Caribbean, Mexico, and in Europe as well. So I have a lot of background in distribution, and I dealt with manufacturing all over the world, in Italy, in Switzerland, in China. So a lot of perspective when it comes to talking with business owners about insurance. And back in 2008, when we had a huge downturn, the impact on my industry in the retail was quite significant. That I had to reinvent myself, so to speak. And as a business owner, that's one of the things that is not always the most challenging, but it certainly adds, I think, value when it comes to whatever chapter you're going to develop in the future, which led me into the insurance business. Because the one thing I learned being in the luxury watch business was not everybody needs a watch, but everybody does need insurance. And ironically, that's what drove me.
Courses. Okay. You put the.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that's what led me to the business. So let me jump right into it. So we're going to be talking about commercial insurance. And I understand most everybody on the call today has already started their businesses. But I'm going to give a broad overview, more of a 30,000-foot view of commercial insurance. And that's just a disclaimer. We don't really need to go into that. But basically, I'm going to talk about the traditional business owner insurance policy. And what this is, it's more of a package type of policy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the business owner's policy, the elements that are made up of that, general liability, talk about that in more detail. And then at the end, if you have any questions about the impact of COVID on your businesses or in general, we can talk about that. As you know, obviously, COVID is an evolving situation, and we really haven't seen the true impact of what COVID is having on the insurance industry. But there are some things that have developed that some business owners have experienced. So we can talk about that in more of a general term. And again, I know Jolene had mentioned if you have questions, hold them to the end. But it's okay if you want to raise a question, or if you wanted to go into a little more in depth about a specific topic, or if you have a specific question about your own business, I'm happy to talk about that. It can make it a little bit more lively than me just sitting here and talking through the slides. So again, we'll go through the business owners coverage. What I'd like to do is I have these short little videos. Hopefully they will work. And I just wanted to start with the basic business owners policy and what it is. So just take a listen for a minute or two.
Jeff,
Yeah.
sorry for interrupting. Was there supposed to be audio on the video?
Oh, could you not hear it?
No, I had a few say that they weren't able to hear the audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was audio on it. Yep. Okay, so I apologize. So maybe the videos, I thought it was definitely coming through on my end, so I apologize. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just, instead of doing the videos, since not everybody can hear them, I'll just walk through and explain what the business owner's policy is.
I did have someone say it was still helpful to be able to read what was on the video screen if you still want to play them. It was still informative.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then what I'll do is I can do that and then I'll just talk through it, I guess. Although some people may be getting the video, the audio on the video.
I didn't have anyone comment that they were able to hear it. I had a hand
Okay.
say they couldn't.
Okay. 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 Sorry about that. So let me then just go through the business owner's policy. So basically, it's a package policy, meaning that they will couple in coverage for your business owners, for your business personal property. So that would be your equipment. It could be inventory. It would be tables, chairs, depending on your business. Look at everything that you would physically own in your business, and you want to cover that. God forbid there's a fire, a theft, or some kind of water damage or something along those lines. So it brings together the business personal property. It will cover personal liability or business liability, so that they were talking in the video about slips and falls. So if you have a retail location, for example, and you have many people coming in as customers, and you have a large area like a restaurant or any area where consumers will be coming in, you want to be protected in case something happens, whether it's a slip or fall, somebody's pushed, or something happens along those lines. That's the general liability typically when you're looking at for restaurant coverage. And then there's others. Again, if you have business interruption, if there is damage to the structure, some sort of event where it precludes you from doing business, there is additional income that you can have cover for the time period that you're not able to conduct business. So they package this together under one policy so that it makes it easier and it's more fluid, and it becomes much more cost effective than having 3 or 4 different policies and it's all put together. So that's typically what they call the business owner's policy. And there's more detail, and we'll go through that as I go through the slides. So again, I'll see what I can do about the video, but we'll see. Let me just, okay. And then the next one is commercial auto insurance. I don't really want to go into too much detail. Commercial auto is fairly straightforward. If you have a business, number one, that owns your autos, you want to have a commercial auto policy. If you use your commercial autos in your business, whether it's a trucking company, you own a fleet, or you have delivery service and you own the vehicles, you want to consider having commercial auto, because on a personal auto policy, typically business activities are excluded. So you want to be very careful. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds. Like on a personal auto policy, you can get certain business coverage. For example, if you're a realtor and you're going out and visiting clients. But when you start driving people around and you start doing more activities related to commercial work, you really want to have a commercial auto policy. I'm happy to go into it in more detail, but it's a little bit more straightforward. So again, any commercial activities you really want to consider with an auto, you really want to consider having a commercial auto policy. I will say though, that if you do have just whatever the business is and you have employees who are going and doing activities related to the business, let's just say you have, I don't know, an architect's business or something along those lines where you're taking materials to clients and your employees are driving on behalf of the business, there are coverages you can extend on a business owner's policy, non-owned auto coverages, and there's things like that. The one thing I always recommend, and I'll talk about a little bit further, is when you're working with your insurance agent, you always want to disclose as much about your business as possible so they will understand the types of coverages you need. Assuming that they may know something is never a good idea because all businesses are different. So disclosing details is really the beginning and the most effective way of being able to get properly covered. So the insurance agent that you work with should be able to ask a lot of questions. And it may get a little, not intrusive, but if they ask more questions, that means they're just getting a better understanding of your business. And each business, as I said, is very different. We all have different activities and different goals. So we want to be very careful, but that's commercial auto. Let me move on. And then this is something, workers' compensation. This is a coverage that is separate from a business owner's policy. And this is when you have employees. You could be a sole proprietor as well, and you can have workers' compensation coverage for yourself. In the state of Pennsylvania, it is not mandatory to have insurance for the business owner or partners. But if you have employees, it is critical that you have workers' compensation insurance coverage. Because again, if a worker gets hurt during the course of business, there is this fund, and you can get private insurance. There's also a state fund depending on the industry, but workers' compensation is mandatory. And if you don't have the coverage, you can get fines for that, and it's not something you want to go without. So again, when you're talking to your insurance agent, you want to talk to them about the number of employees you have, the types of work they do, the amount of compensation they get. All of those details make up the premium and the cost for workers' compensation. So if you have an office worker, as an example, they will be rated differently for the cost of insurance versus a contractor or somebody doing manual labor or somebody who is, scaling a building, cleaning windows. So different coverage, different premiums depending on the risk. But workers' compensation is something that is absolutely necessary if you're going to have employees. And again, if anybody has any questions as I'm going through this, I'd love to show the videos, but again, I would be talking over it because I could hear it. So I don't know if I can mute that, but let me just go on to the next slide. So this is, I'm going to try to do this. So let's just see if I can, and then okay, so I'm muting it so that way it will run. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So an umbrella policy, if any of you have home and auto insurance, I'm assuming everybody has auto insurance, but if you have a home and an auto insurance policy personally, you may have what's called an umbrella policy. And this is similar in the commercial world. So you have a business owner's policy, you have a certain amount of liability limits, and I will be getting into more of that. But this is an additional layer of liability protection in case you end up getting sued or something happens in your business where you have to pay out a sum of money. So typically on a business owner's policy, there is a general liability coverage of $1 million per occurrence, and maybe a total of $2 million if there's more than one occurrence in a given year. But what happens if, let's just say, you get sued for $1.5 million and you have $1 million per situation? So you're exposed for $500,000. This umbrella policy will cover you for an additional layer of liability. So again, depending on your business, depending on your comfort level with the underlying coverage that you have, this is just an additional layer of liability coverage, and they call it an umbrella. So I will move on. And then what I have here is just a slide which outlines, I'm using Travelers as my backdrop. I work with a number of different companies, but there are a lot of different types of policies. The business owner's policy is a comprehensive policy, but there are additional coverages that you can get. You can get a standalone general liability policy, and there are other policies as well. And I'll talk about different types of liability coverage depending on the industry that you're in. But I believe, and I'm not sure if this is going to be available, this slideshow, so if you wanted to have it more in depth or take your time going through it and being able to listen to the video, this may be available to you afterwards. So we can certainly make it available if you're interested in having this and using it at your own leisure. So let's get into the general liability part of the discussion. And if I'm going a little too fast, please let me know, but I want to make sure I get everything in that is potentially relevant to you. So when we look at general liability in a business owner's policy, there are different types of coverage that go into the general liability, and all of this would be included when you're looking at a coverage. So when we look at premises operation as an example, and it was discussed initially, so let's just say you have a retail location, you have a customer coming in, they slip and fall. That would be premises liability. So again, somebody coming in your operation, you have a manufacturing facility, you have customers coming in, you have suppliers coming in, somebody slips and falls, they injure themselves, that's premises liability. That's the most common that you can think of. And for many businesses, that may not be a big issue. If you're a restaurant, it's going to cost more because you have more exposure and more frequency. If you have a professional office, may not be so much. Or even if you're a sole practitioner and you're doing everything over the phone, it may not be a huge issue, but that is something that is a part of the general liability coverage. Then we get to products liability. So again, if you're a restaurant and you're serving food, the product that you serve, if somebody gets sick, that type of thing. If you are an importer of someone else's product and you label it yourself, it becomes your own label, but you're buying it from someone else, you still have products liability exposure because you would be considered the manufacturer. So anytime you have a product that you're selling or you're relabeling or you're manufacturing, you are the manufacturer. So that would be products liability. So for an example, if you're making children's toys or you're making any kind of consumer related product, this is where the coverage would come in. If there isn't a situation where you get sued because somebody got hurt, if it's a product that somebody swallows, if it's a consumer cosmetic and somebody uses it and they have an infection or something like that, that becomes products liability related, so specifically to a product. And then we get to completed operations. So think about somebody who does contracting work, an electrician, a plumber. They come to your house, they do work, and let's just say a plumber does work and they are fixing a leak, and 3 days later the leak continues and you find 5 inches of water in your basement. Well, you can go back to the plumber and you can go after them because the work that they did, the completed operation, failed. So there was liability there. It's that type of thing. Or you have contractors coming to your house, they're working on something, they finish it, and let's just say they do an addition and it falls down. Those are what they call completed operation, when something is completed and finished. So that's what that type of liability is. Then there's, excuse me, personal and advertising injury. Well, this is a little bit more obvious. Imagine you're doing any kind of advertising, whether it's online, whether it's traditional advertising on television or in print, in magazines, and you're making claims. You're guaranteeing certain things that may not be true, or you're saying your competitors are not as good as you are, or you're making some kind of comments that may be construed as slander. That's that kind of coverage. So that would be, again, looking at your own businesses, how that would impact any kind of promotion or anything you're doing online. And always have to be very careful. It doesn't have to be, I mean, you could be acting on, let's just say Facebook, and you're talking to somebody and somebody sees that you're bashing another competitor. These are things now with all the new technology we have to be careful of. So that's that. And then the last one is if something happens on the premises, and let's just say somebody does a slip and fall and they need to get immediate medical attention, that may avoid a further liability claim. So this is medical payments, and this would be to, again, somebody comes to your office, or somebody comes to your manufacturing facility that get hurt. They go to the hospital, they need stitches, they need an x-ray. This would then say, well, we'll pay for that, hopefully to avoid any larger claim. So all of those things make up the general liability. And one of the things as an insurance agent that I do, I want to make sure that I've got enough information to be able to explain to the underwriter exactly what you do for a living and what the exposure is. Without that information, we're not going to be able to insure you properly. So all of those details that you know about your business are going to be extremely important to share with your insurance agent. And I'll go through that a little bit further. Again, I say if you have any questions or anything, if I'm not making things clear, please let me know. I'm happy to backtrack or go into further detail. So again, this is just slides. I mentioned premises liability. It's just showing slip and falls are the most common. Product liability, you know, I don't know, the candy apples look good, so I'm not sure if you could sue somebody for eating too many of them and gaining weight, but if the apples aren't good, that may be something that you can sue. But again, it's the impact on the product and how it could potentially harm a consumer. That would be the exposure. And then again, completed operations, whether you have somebody coming and doing work on your home, electrician, somebody that is going to be completing work at another location, and potentially there's a liability arising from that. You know, I can give you an example, even though it's, I had a client who put in sidewalks, and they put in heated sidewalks. They had a plumber who put all of the work in. The one thing they forgot to do at the end of the season, they forgot to flush the lines. And as a result, when winter came, they froze and all of the heating mechanisms under the sidewalk were damaged. And so it was like a $30,000 claim. Unfortunately, the plumber that did the work, they had the proper liability coverage to take care of that. That's the kind of stuff that could happen. And then personal and advertising injury. Again, we talked about that, just being careful what you say and what you promote, and any type of guarantees or anything like that could get you into trouble down the road. The other thing that is important to know when you're buying an insurance policy, whether it's a business owner's policy or any other type of policy, the named insured typically will be probably the name of your organization. So they would be the primary name on the policy. But if you're a sole practitioner, or if you're the sole owner, or if you're the owner, you also will have specific rights to, number one, obviously to pay the premium. You'll be the one to make changes on the policy. You also, if you're a larger organization, if you have a CFO or other vice presidents, they may be able to as well do things with regard to the policy. And so there's different levels of importance when it comes to the insurance policy and what can be done within that. So this just talks about that. The additional insured, now that's that is used, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I have a client who has a retail food location, and he does trade shows. So he'll go across the country selling his product at trade shows. The trade show will want to be added as an additional interest onto the insurance policy. So in case when he's at the trade show, somebody gets hurt at his booth, something happens at the booth, they want to make sure that his insurance policy will cover him before theirs kicks in. If you have, for example, a trucking business and you are hauling things for other people, the people that you're hauling for may want to be added as an additional interest. If something happens to the food or there's an accident, they don't want to be liable for the activities of your operation. Or if you are taking out, for example, you're buying equipment and the bank wants to make sure that they get paid, they want to be added as an additional insured to make sure that they're included as the payer, that they will be paid out if something were to happen to the business or the equipment. So those are the types of things, and there's a lot more detail in the insurance policy, but just to give you a fair overview of that. And then, of course, there's different types of organizations that you can set yourself up as. I'm assuming if all of you are in business, you probably have already done that. But the most common that I see is a sole proprietor. And we explain a little bit, if somebody wants to get in business, they're not sure where they're going to go and they don't want to invest money in setting up a corporation. A lot of times they'll start a business as a sole proprietor, and as they grow, they may want to become a limited partnership, an LLC. So there's all those details. And again, if you have a good attorney, they can walk you through it, and it's not terribly expensive to set yourself up that way. But it's important to recognize what your exposure is and how you can shield yourself against certain activities of the organization. So that's, again, something to consider and think about as you move forward in your business. Professional liability. So I talked about general liability, which is more for manufacturing, retail, but what about people like myself? I'm an insurance agent. So my product, even though I sell insurance, my product a lot of times is advice and guidance. So I have what's called errors and omissions coverage. If you're a consultant, lawyers have professional liability. Doctors, nurses need professional liability. Anybody that's dispensing advice and guidance, healthcare workers, they may need errors and omissions. And as I mentioned, consultants of all types. If you're on a nonprofit board, not to get off topic, but if you're on a board, you want to make sure that they have directors and officers liability coverage. This protects you in your role as advisor or guiding people. And if you give out bad advice, or if you, for example, if I give somebody an insurance policy and the coverage is incorrect or it's excluded for some reason and they want to sue me, that's why I have errors and omissions coverage to protect you. So this is a different type of liability coverage for more of a professional consulting organization. And then one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which is critical, and again, if many of you have insurance currently, you may have already done this, but I can only speak for myself. When I am speaking to somebody looking for insurance, whether they already have it or they're new to business, I ask a lot of questions. The obvious ones, I want to know the name of the company, the address. I want to get the details. Do you own the building? Are you renting? And even if you're renting space, you still want to know some details about the facility, because we're going to be insuring your business personal property, and the insurance company is going to want to know the type of building, meaning like, if it was built in 1900 and never improved, that's going to be a tough risk. So they want to see that they're going to be insuring somebody in a good location. And then they want to know your type of business. So they're going to want to, underwriters are like consumers. They are going to do research on the business. And now that we have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and then obviously your own websites, they're going to want to be able to look to see, who are they insuring? What's the type of business? What do they actually do? You say one thing, does the website say the same exact thing? I'll give you an example of how things can be impacted by social media. So when I first got started, I was working with a hair salon, and pretty straightforward. They did have some professional liability in case somebody cut somebody's ear off, but for the most part, it's a very straightforward business. So I inputted all the information, spoke to the underwriters, and a day later I get a decline. And so I speak to the underwriters. I'm like, how could you decline the business? And they said, well, they have happy hours. They're giving alcohol to their clients on Thursdays. So I didn't look at their website, and lo and behold, they had happy hours. And so I called he's actually my friend. I said, what are you doing? You can't give alcohol to your clients. It's a hair salon. He's like, oh, we didn't do that. We stopped doing that years ago. Well, I had him take down that information off of his website. They were able to get approved. But again, this is an example of, you've got to be very careful when you're presenting your website, that the information you have is exactly what you do, and try not to be aspirational. And by that, I mean, don't put in things, or don't tell your insurance underwriter, well, this is what we do today, but I'm thinking about doing this, if you haven't done it, because it gets very confusing for insurance carriers when you're not specific about what you do. And if you have very diverse businesses, you may want to get separate policies depending on what it is that you do. So information is going to be key. And when insurance carriers are evaluating risk, they're going to want to know what your revenue is. They're going to want to know if you're a retail space, the amount of square feet you're using for consumers. So they're going to want to know these things. And then they will do audits to make sure that what we say is true is happening. Meaning if our sales are 50,000, but then at the end of the year they become 250,000, well, they're going to reevaluate the risk because you're a different exposure. So we always want to be able to communicate with your insurance agent when you make any kind of changes or when there's a drastic increase or maybe decrease, or if you're hiring or firing employees. So this is something where you don't want to just have an insurance policy and forget it. It should be reviewed on a regular basis. So that way there's no underinsuring or overinsuring. So it's very good to have an insurance agent that you're comfortable with and that will probe and will help you out in making sure that you've got the proper coverage. So again, communication is key, and being able to tell your story and tell it completely is really, really important. Let me just go to the next slide. Oh, let me just see. I think I froze. Well, the next slide was actually going to be, yeah, I apologize for this. This happened before. Let me just close it. The next slide that I wanted to talk about was the impact on COVID-19 onto insurance policies, onto consumers, not consumers, but onto business owners. So again, there's a lot that's still being looked at. I know that I've had a couple of calls from clients who were saying, hey, I want to file a claim. My business has been interrupted. This is crazy. I've got insurance. Can I be covered? So under most circumstances, to be able to file a claim for business interruption, and I'm generalizing, you have to look at some kind of physical damage that's been done to your business. So if we're looking at COVID-19, what physical damage has been done to the business? Yes, your business has been interrupted, but a couple of things. Number one, it's been done by a government action. So if you look at the fine print on your insurance policy, you will see government actions exclude coverage on the policy. I'm generalizing. Is there a policy out there that wouldn't? There may be, but the majority of them, not so much. And then if you're saying, well, I still want to be able to collect, there's another disclaimer about disease. So this would be considered, COVID-19 would be a disease. So that also would be excluded. There are definitely ways to be able to potentially get coverage, but it's a challenge. So I don't know if anybody has any specific questions or concerns or thoughts on COVID, or any other questions or thoughts. I know I went through things fairly quick, and I apologize that the video sound wasn't working. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to go through things. Anything of importance or topic that you feel that I missed, that I didn't go through thoroughly enough?
I received a question from someone, Jeff. The question was, how soon does insurance coverage kick in once you purchase it?
So obviously they have to go through a claims process. So you have to file a claim. And you don't have to file a claim immediately, depending on what we're talking about. But the turnaround time, it varies, but you should see some action. So if you file the claim, for example, today, I mean, you should be seeing activity fairly immediately. When you get the check, I mean, they're going to have to do an investigation depending on what it is. But you should be able to see activity within 24 to 48 hours of filing the claim. So again, if you're looking for when are you going to get the check, well, that varies. It varies on whether it's a covered claim, and that's why you want to talk to your insurance agent about whether or not you should file the claim. But insurance companies are typically very responsive. I mean, it should be like within a 30-day period, unless again, it's something that's not cut and dry and it may not be covered. I mean, if it's a theft, one of the things too, there's certain guidelines depending on the type of business you have. They may require that you have a burglar alarm. And if you have a burglar alarm and you didn't have it on, so they're going to be doing investigations. But typically, most companies believe it or not, want to help you out and want to pay a claim. But you should be able to see activity and potentially payments within 30 days.
And with regard to an initial purchase of a policy, how soon after you purchase an initial policy will coverage begin usually?
Oh, I mean, you can do it within 24 hours. I mean, you could do it. Depends. Some companies don't do policies same day, but within 24 hours. Depending on the underwriting, depending on the sophistication of it, if it's fairly straightforward. I work on a number of policies. It takes me a while because I have to go into different markets and underwriters don't move as quickly as we want them to. So it depends. But once we get everything set and we all agree on the coverage, it can be done fairly quick.
Okay.
I saw something pop up about restaurants and COVID.
Is there any specific coverage that should be looked at for restaurants because of COVID?
You see it again, the COVID situation, and I have to be very careful with that because if we're talking business interruption, there has to be showing some kind of physical damage. Typically, disease, as I mentioned before, is not covered. So it's a moving target. And I don't know if there's been anything, and I've spoken to a number of companies with some of my clients about the business interruption aspect. And I've been told that it's just not covered because it's excluded in two areas. The the government action and disease are excluded from most insurance policy. Is there, I missed that. Something about covering.
If an insurance company goes through Pennsylvania, the state workers' compensation, then can any other insurance company have a lower premium? And is there an insurance policy that protects a company from getting sued due to COVID, such as requiring masks of employees and customers?
I've asked a number of companies, well, let me just talk about the masks thing. One of the things that's very difficult to discern is, how did somebody contract it? Did they contract it from your business when they walked in? How do you prove, not you as the business owner, you don't have to prove, it's the customer has to prove, how did they get the COVID? How can they prove they got it from being in your location? So can you get sued? Yes, you have liability coverage if you get sued. I think it would probably be something that would be dismissed because there's no way to prove that they got it from being in your location. And so that's what I'm thinking they're asking. And what was the other part of the question? Is there?
If an insurance company goes through Pennsylvania for workers' comp insurance, then can any other insurance company have a lower premium? Corey, I don't know if you want to unmute and expand upon your question to clarify that for Jeff.
So companies will, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So companies, when they apply for workers' comp, from my understanding, there's the state workers' comp program that you have to go through, but isn't there also can't insurance companies also provide workers' comp without going through the Pennsylvania?
Yes.
government?
So yes, they can. So, some businesses as startups, they may not get coverage through maybe a private company, whether it's Travelers, Hartford, CNA, any of the other companies out there. So they have to go through the state workers' comp fund, and there's some industries that are just very difficult to insure. So, but yes, they can go through two private companies, maybe once they're established. It really depends on the industry because sometimes the only place to get coverage is through the state fund. But and typically the rates, when you're looking at workers' comp, I mean, there's a couple of things that drive the rate, and that would be obviously the type of employee, what their function is. So if somebody, as I may have mentioned before, if somebody is a a white collar worker, they're going to have a different rate than somebody who is in the construction business or is climbing poles for utility companies. So it depends, but you potentially can go to the private market, and there may be some savings involved. But again, a lot of times too, there are specific rates and costs depending on the type of work people are doing and the premium rate. Did that answer your question, or was that more of a politically correct answer. Okay, okay. Was
Perfect. Thank you.
there, okay, was there any other questions or anything that I missed that I could go into more I'm sorry?
If anybody
I
has
think-
any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves. And
Okay, and the one thing, again, I can't stress enough is to be very, very careful of your social media presence. It really is critical. As I said, insurance companies look at that stuff. They're consumers just like everybody else, and making sure too that you disclose exactly what you do. So if you're a restaurant and you do delivery, don't sneak that by, because that's a significant exposure. If you sell alcohol, and I've seen this, and you have a liquor license, you'd have to have one, but if you're not discussing that and getting liquor liability because it's too expensive, that's a heavy duty exposure. Insurance, I understand it's not fun. I know it's costly. You hate to spend the money on it. I get all that, but it could take your business down, especially if it's not being fully disclosed. So that's the one thing I have to say. And then when you do just expand into different areas, the other thing too that's really important, if you're selling online, you need to know the percentage of sales you're doing online versus in a storefront. If you're selling through the United States and beyond, different countries, that's important to know. As I mentioned before, if you're manufacturing product yourself, that's one thing. But if you're getting product from other manufacturers and labeling it for your own label, like your own private label, you need to know what it is, because again, if you're putting some, like for example, if you're using like face creams or you're doing some kind of cosmetics, the insurance company wants to know what exactly these things are. Or if it's food related, also they want to know what the chemicals are. I was just working with somebody who was buying product from all over the world, and he was pre-packaging it, and he was doing measurements, and some of the things that he was putting in the packages could potentially be toxic depending on how the end user used it. So these are things that we have to know, and there's specialty companies that will cover that type of product. So I don't know if there's anything else I can add about commercial business owners' policies or liability, or any questions about COVID. COVID, again, there's a lot of unknowns out there. I mean, I know a lot of businesses have been impacted greatly, but there's a lot of unknowns as to what would be covered and what wouldn't be covered.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thank you, Jeff, so much for sharing your insights and being here with us today. Just a few housekeeping notes. I will be making available the recording of this training on the Wilkes University SBDC YouTube channel, and I will email that link to all attendees. Sorry for the baby noises in the background, everyone. Also, I will be emailing all attendees the link to a post-event survey so that we can determine which of our resources will best suit your needs and what topics you would like to see in future training sessions. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending this training. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at the SBDC. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing all of you at future webinars. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great one.
Thank you. Thank you.